The Great Upheaval, an unprecedented migration. Over 15 million people were displaced in one of the largest migrations in human history. The year was 1947, and the Indian subcontinent was being divided into India and Pakistan. This division, known as the Partition, was a time of great turmoil. Entire towns and villages emptied as people walked for hundreds of miles carrying few belongings. Fear and uncertainty filled the air as this was a journey into the unknown. This mass displacement was marked by terrible violence. Communities that had lived together for centuries suddenly found themselves as enemies. The birth of freedom came at a high price, paid by ordinary people. Understanding this event is crucial as it profoundly shaped modern South Asia. Echoes of Empire: The Road to Division. British rule in India lasted nearly 200 years. Initially, the British came as traders and slowly gained political power. The East India Company became very powerful, and by the mid-19th century, Britain ruled directly. British policies often created divisions, emphasizing differences between groups to maintain control. Religious identities became more pronounced, with Hindus and Muslims as the two largest groups. Indian nationalism grew stronger in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, leading to the formation of the Indian National Congress in 1885. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi called for a united, independent India. Some Muslim leaders, fearing being a minority in a Hindu-majority India, formed the All India Muslim League in 1906, initially seeking safeguards for Muslims. Later it began to demand a separate state. The path to independence was becoming complex. The two-nation idea, a deepening divide. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, leader of the Muslim League, initially advocated for Hindu-Muslim unity but later demanded a separate state for Muslims called Pakistan. The Muslim League argued that Hindus and Muslims were two distinct nations with different religions, cultures, and histories. The Indian National Congress, with leaders like Gandhi and Nehru, strongly opposed this idea, believing in a secular, united India. The debate between these viewpoints intensified in the 1940s. As World War II ended, Britain decided to grant independence to India. The question was, one India or two? Negotiations were fraught with tension and mistrust. Communal riots broke out, showing the terrible violence that could erupt. A line drawn in haste, the Radcliffe Award. Lord Mountbatten arrived in India in March 1947 as the last British viceroy, tasked with overseeing the transfer of power. He advanced the date of independence to August 15, 1947, leaving little time for planning. A British lawyer, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, was given the job of drawing the border. Radcliffe had never been to India and had only 5 weeks to complete the task. The final borders were announced on August 17, 1947, creating enormous confusion and chaos. Villages were split, and families found themselves on the wrong side. The announcement fueled panic and fear, triggering one of the greatest migrations. The Radcliffe Line disrupted economic and social systems. Many historians argue that the haste and the way the borders were drawn worsened the violence of partition. Section 5, August 1947. Freedom and Fracture. On August 14, 1947, Pakistan became independent, with Muhammad Ali Jinnah as its first governor-general. Millions of Muslims celebrated the birth of their new nation. However, this joy was mixed with apprehension. The full implications of partition were dawning. The next day, August 15, 1947, India gained independence, with Jawaharlal Nehru as its first prime minister. Nehru gave a famous speech, Tryst with Destiny, speaking of India awakening to life and freedom. Millions across India celebrated with great joy. But this freedom was also tinged with sorrow. The days leading up to and following independence were filled with unprecedented chaos and violence. As the borders were announced, panic spread. Minorities on both sides feared for their lives. They faced an urgent, terrible choice: stay and risk death or persecution, or leave everything behind and flee. The newly formed governments of India and Pakistan were unprepared for the scale of the crisis. They lacked resources and administrative capacity. The breakdown of law and order was widespread, especially in Punjab and Bengal. Armed militias roamed the countryside, and trains carrying refugees were attacked. The violence was brutal and relentless. Freedom came at a terrible human cost. Section 6: Millions uprooted, the human flood. The announcement of the Radcliffe Line unleashed chaos. Over 15 million people were forced to move. This was not a planned or orderly migration, it was a desperate flight for survival. Hindus and Sikhs fled from West Pakistan to India. Muslims fled from East Punjab and other parts of India. They traveled towards West or East Pakistan. This movement happened in a very short time, mostly in the latter half of 1947. People traveled in whatever way they could. Many walked in long columns called kafilas, facing hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. Others crammed onto overloaded trains, which were often targets of attack. Bullock carts and trucks were also used, but many had to abandon even these. They carried only what they could hold, leaving precious belongings behind forever. The journey was incredibly dangerous, with refugees facing attacks from armed groups. There were massacres, looting and abductions. The roads and railway tracks were littered with bodies. The summer heat and monsoon rains added to the misery. Disease spread rapidly in makeshift camps, with cholera and dysentery claiming many lives. Huge refugee camps sprang up on both sides, struggling to provide basic necessities. Families were separated in the chaos, and many never found their loved ones again. The trauma of displacement would last a lifetime. Section 7, Rivers of Blood, the Agony of Partition. The partition was not just about drawing lines on a map, it was accompanied by horrific communal violence. Estimates of the number of deaths vary widely, from 200,000 to 2 million. Neighbors turned on neighbors and decades of coexistence shattered. The violence was particularly intense in Punjab, which was cut in two by the new border. Sikhs, Muslims, and Hindus who had lived together were caught in a frenzy of killing. Armed gangs, often with political backing, committed unspeakable atrocities. Entire villages were wiped out, and women faced horrific forms of violence. Bengal also witnessed widespread violence, though perhaps not on the same scale as Punjab. The division of Bengal led to displacement and outbreaks of communal rioting. Other areas like Delhi also saw bloodshed. Fear became a constant companion for many, and trust between communities was destroyed. Survivors recall scenes of unimaginable horror, losing family members and homes. The psychological trauma was immense, with many carrying these scars for the rest of their lives. The violence left a deep wound on the subcontinent, creating a legacy of bitterness and mistrust. This legacy continues to affect relations between India and Pakistan today. The stories from this period are harrowing, and the violence created a lasting impact. Section 8. Voices in the Storm, Leaders and Their Burdens. Mahatma Gandhi, a leading figure in India's struggle for independence, championed a united India and was deeply opposed to the partition. He worked tirelessly to promote Hindu-Muslim unity, even as violence raged around him. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, also wanted a united India, but eventually accepted partition as a tragic necessity. Nehru faced the enormous task of building a new nation, while dealing with the chaos of partition. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the driving force behind the creation of Pakistan, believed Muslims needed a separate homeland. Jinnah achieved his goal, but died just over a year after Pakistan's birth. His vision for Pakistan is still debated. Lord Mountbatten, the last viceroy, played a crucial role in the events of 1947, overseeing the plan for partition. Historians have different views on his role, with some praising him for a swift transfer of power and others criticizing him for the haste. The leaders of this era faced immense pressures, and their choices had profound consequences. Gandhi's efforts to stop the killings included undertaking fasts. Nehru had to resettle millions of refugees. The leaders' decisions shaped the future of the subcontinent. Section 9. A Fractured Dawn, The Lasting Scars. The Partition of India in 1947 was a defining moment in South Asian history, leading to the birth of India and Pakistan, later joined by Bangladesh in 1971. This birth was traumatic and violent, leaving deep scars on the region. The memory of partition is still raw for those who lived through it and their descendants. One of the most significant lasting effects is the relationship between India and Pakistan. The two countries have fought several wars, mainly over the disputed territory of Kashmir. The border remains heavily militarized, with nuclear weapons adding another layer of tension. Mistrust and suspicion often characterize relations, making lasting peace difficult to achieve. Culturally, partition led to great changes, dividing shared traditions and heritage. However, it also led to new cultural expressions, with writers, poets, and filmmakers exploring the pain and trauma of partition. The idea of home became complex for many, and identities were profoundly shaped by partition. Religious identity became more prominent, and national identities were forged in opposition to the other across the border. The displacement created new communities, with refugees bringing their cultures to new places. They rebuilt their lives, but the loss remained. The partition's echoes continue to resonate,